5 seconds. All right. Make yourselves comfortable. Thank everyone for coming this evening for the public input session of the Managed Growth Steering Committee. My name is Jeff Stillings, member of the Board of Selectmen. The steering committee is represented by members of the different boards in town. And this is our 5th meeting to discuss the effects of managed growth. And before we have our presentation with Mr. Ron Barron from Central Mass Regional Planning, he's going to talk about the results of the study, the very in-depth study. We'll just go down, we'll introduce who's present for the meeting. Joe, you're with us, buddy. All right, grab a chair. And we'll let Ron do his presentation, and then we'll have ample opportunity for any public input that you wanted to say. Okay, this is not a hearing. This is an informational session. We're here to receive information, get public input, and then continue with our steering committee. So, that being said, just in time, Joe, go ahead, just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Joe Buckley. I'm the Director of Public Works for the town of Rutland. Okay. I'm relatively new, so nice to meet you all.
I'm Sean Moore. I'm representing Conservation Commission.
Hi, I'm Mike Nicholson. I'm the new town administrator here in Rutland. I understand I haven't met most of you yet, just being here a month, but I did bring my new cards with me, so afterward, if you'd like to get one, always feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions or anything like that. Thanks.
Hi, good evening. My name is Dave George. I'm the town planner.
Scott Gilroy, I am the chairman, Board of the Health.
And before we begin, I just want to say that this event is being recorded and streamed live on channel 192 of the Public Access channel. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ron Barron with the Central Mass Regional Planning Committee, also the chair of the Managed Growth Steering Committee. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. And thank everyone for coming out tonight. Appreciate that it's could be a little bit of a challenge given the weather alerts that we've been hearing, but hopefully we'll be able to get this done before we actually get any snow. Just one little disclaimer. I apologize in advance for how I may sound over the course of this, but I am on the tail end of a cold. So hopefully I'm past all of the, getting people sick stage. Again, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Ron Barron. I'm with the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission. I've been with them for a little over 2 years, and during that time, I've spent nearly all of it working with Rutland in one capacity or another. I came here working with them on the first phase of this project. I helped them out during the planning board out during as an interim planner last year, and we worked on we helped write this grant, and we're helping manage it to try to move this project along, because I know that the rate of growth that's been going in town has been something that the town has been very concerned with for a very long time. Just as a quick overview of what we're going to be doing tonight, I'd like to just very quickly go through the process of what we did, why we did it, and what the initial findings are. We came up with a list of some of the options that the steering committee is going to pursue with the town. Obviously, anything that comes out of the steering committee is going to have to go through the process, so this is going to be an open, engaged process that we go through. And also to, we'd like to talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of some of these options. And then the final thing we'd like to do is to open it up to questions, and I'd really like to get some general feedback from everybody here on what is concerning you about the rate of growth, if anything. What's your opinion on the rate of growth? What issues are we not addressing? Because not every option that we're going to look at is going to fix every aspect of housing growth and population growth and things like that. So there it is. Quick overview of the project. I came onto this when we did it in 2017. It's part of a type of grant that's called a District Local Technical Assistance Grant. That's money that we, as the central planning agency for this region, we get from the state, and we use that to try to take a look at some of the properties that had been approved by the planning board over the years but hadn't been built yet. What had happened is several years ago, a lot of subdivisions had been approved during the height of the market. Then when we hit the recession, they just sort of sat there, and they, things, enough was happening to keep them approved, but they weren't being built out yet. Then the market started to pick up. A lot of building permits were being pulled, and the town wanted to know, oh wait, what's going to happen if all of these get built at once? So that was what we ended up doing in phase one. What we did during that period too is we found an opportunity to get some grant funding from the state. There's a grant that's funded by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which is a terrible name, but they are a great agency because they helped us fund this project. The EEA project, and it gave us grant funds really aimed at trying to help towns get past the planning stage on things. So one of the things that they wanted is they wanted whatever we did, we were really free to come up with any project we wanted, but it had to be tied to a goal from a previous study, and it had to be aimed at trying to get something implemented from that study. So we had a few things that we wanted to do from the 2017 project. We had found, some basic findings from it. The original phase, we looked at the growth rate. Rutland residential growth rate averaged 27% per decade since 1990. Housing units grew almost 30% from 1990 to 2000 and 35% in the next decade. So it's a really dramatic growth rate. When we were looking at the subdivisions, we kind of wanted to know what the universe of potential units was, and we found that there were nearly 400 units. We had various estimates based on different calculations. We knew we had a hard count of approved units that was about 300 units at that time. And there was an additional 100 units that were in the assessor's database that were places that were clearly parceled out for residential units but hadn't been built over the course of the year. So these were the numbers. So we came up about 400. We felt that was a comfortable estimate to go with. But after we did this, we realized we didn't really have a good sense of what was available past that. We didn't really know what the town's capacity was for growth beyond what had already been approved. We had looked at a build-out analysis that had been done, I want to say, what was it, 2008? I don't remember. It was quite a while ago. There was a build-out analysis done. And the number of units that they had estimated in that was something like on the order of about 4,000. And the number of units that, with the ones that had been approved and what's already in town, was right about 4,000. So we were like, is the town at capacity or not? So we wanted to do something that was a little bit more robust to let everybody know what your potential capacity is for new housing growth in the town. And that is what we set out to do with this project. Again, we just came up with a couple of very basic research questions. How much land is still available for development in Rutland? You look at what is in the town. There's a lot of farms. There's a lot of subdivisions. There's a lot of land that's owned by the state. And you may think that there isn't really all that much that's left to develop. So we wanted to get a good sense of what that would like. And then we also wanted to know what kind of impacts there were. Now, one of the things we have a lot of things we looked at in the phase one. We looked at students, we looked at water, we looked at wastewater, we looked at roads. Because of the moratorium that was put in place on new sewer and water connections, we sort of scaled this one back. We did do some estimates in students, we did do some estimates in population, but we focused more on the water and sewer impacts for this piece. So we're going to talk more about that than we are about the population and the students right now. But this is data that we have, and this is, one of the things we're going to want to talk about is, what people's other concerns are. What else would you like us to look at as part of this? And then we want to know what kind of options the town would have to try to help manage this. Because, again, one of the things that is a goal of this project is to implement something, to get something either to town meeting or a policy change or some sort of an actual output for this plan. So what we ended up doing is we did a full build-out analysis, and I'm going to talk about how that works and how we approached it. We wanted to look again at potential population, calculate the impact on water and sewer, and a couple of other impacts. And I'm going to walk through exactly what a build-out analysis is. So build-out analysis in broad terms is you're basically just taking, it's a look at all of the land in your town. You're looking at everything that is not built on right now. You're subtracting things that can't be built on for various reasons, and then you're taking all of that land left, and in a general build-out, a very generic build-out analysis, you basically take all that land, put it in a pool, look at the zoning, and say, based on your zoning, how many lots could you get out of what's left over from all of that land, once you've taken all the other restrictions out. We did something a little bit more refined than that, so, and I'm going to get to that in just one second. It definitely tries to take into account a lot of the variation that you'll see in land. It doesn't look at it on a parcel-by-parcel basis, but you are taking into account the quality of the land, the slopes, whether there's wetlands, whether there's forest, etc. There are some limitations to it. It's obviously an estimate, and it's an estimate of capacity. It's not, none of these numbers are saying that this is what the town is going to see. This is what the land could carry based on existing zoning. And we have to bear in mind that it's just an estimate, and no estimate is ever going to be perfect. So if there are any numbers, and I say this because a lot of times we'll see numbers, particularly when we start showing people population and students, they'll see numbers and they'll start thinking, oh my God, we have to do something. This is horrible. Again, it's not trying to show that this is exactly what's going to happen. This is just saying what you have the capacity for. So this is a process that is largely based on GIS, and GIS is Geographic Information Service Systems. Basically, it's a mapping program that we use, and it takes into account all of the land in town. We have a layer that we use in GIS. We have a map that we look at that shows all of the development patterns. It's based on currently, unfortunately, 2005 data. But what we do is we take a look at that. We use that as our baseline. Then we start looking at current assessors data. We start looking at current satellite photos. And we go back and we double check it. And we make sure we see where all of the houses are, where all of the land is developed, where everything has, any land that has conservation, et cetera, is on it. There's two concepts that I just want to go over very quickly. What we pull out of the land that we look at are these two constraint categories, the absolute constraints and partial constraints. An absolute constraint is something where either there's a geographic or a regulatory impact that will just 100% completely prevent development from happening. So if you've got conservation restriction that's in perpetuity, if you have land that's owned by the state and it's never going to be, if it's in a watershed and you just can't build on it, that goes into that category. The partial constraint is one where it will prevent it, but in 60, 70% of circumstances, maybe even less. It doesn't do it all the time. So sometimes you'll get land, like say, within a certain distance of a watershed. And that will increase the amount of land you need in order to build a house, or if you're going to put a sewer, et cetera. There's a lot of regulations that go into that. So we have to make some sort of estimate of how much land we have to take out from those. And basically, once we subtract those two constraints, what we're left with is the developable land. And we can parse that in a number of different ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk in a second about how we ended up parsing that. First, I just wanted to show, so this is, unfortunately, a little bit less clear on this screen than it is on mine. But this map is showing the developable land and all of the land that was removed. Some of those reddish colors are all the ones, those are built areas. All of the green parcels are your state-owned lands, conserved lands, things that you're just never going to build on. And everything that's white, for the most part, ended up in the bucket of developable land. So now you could go with this, and you could just take all that land, and then based on zoning, say, oh, this is your number of houses, etc. But we did something a little bit more refined with this. This map is showing the study area that we looked at, because what we wanted to be able to do is say, if we want to estimate the impacts to water and sewer, we want to be able to isolate just the land that is either currently within the sewer district, the water and sewer service district, or we know it either could be or is likely to be extended to. So we went to the planning board and we looked at this map and we saw, okay, these are all the places where water and sewer currently is. We know that there's a couple of subdivisions that are likely, that haven't been built yet, that are likely to ask for an extension. So let's include that just so we can have the land and we can know. And then some areas where we're thinking, well, we know that there's some developers that own that land. They may build a subdivision soon. It's likely that they're going to get extended. So let's include all that. So this basically captures a rough estimate of all the land that, between consultation with the town, we decided was the area most likely to want to have water and sewer. And this is the study area we did for the water and sewer impact. So essentially, everything within that shaded area is what we are calculating as having water and sewer. Everything outside of that, we're assuming is going to be septic and well. So this is sort of the basis of where we came up with some of our numbers. There's a lot of colors going on there, and as we break down, these are going to become clearer as to why they're there, and I'll explain them as we go along. Just want to talk very quickly about some of the base assumptions that we went with here. The population that we looked at came from the 2017 town census. Number we were given was 8,942 residents. Housing units also came from the assessor's office from the town. We can sometimes use the ACS number, that's the American Community Survey, that's a census product. Problem is that when you get outside a major metropolitan area, the numbers start to become very unreliable, so it's always better to use town estimates than it is to use their estimates. Because the margins for error, they get really big. It's sometimes ridiculous. So from that, we made a estimate, very simple estimate. You just take to get the persons per household, divide the total population by the housing units. You do have to factor in the occupancy rate, which was 95% in 2017, according to the American Community Survey. And that gave us an estimator for persons per household of 2.71. Now that we've had some discussion about whether or not that's too high or too low, we did do in the 2017 version, we did an estimator where we took a sample of recent subdivisions and the town census data we had for them. So we took like 2 or 3 of the, what we think would be the standard model subdivision. And we found actually that their household count was actually closer to like 3.2 or something like that. I don't have the number right in front of me. But this accounts for a lot of variation. So not every place is going to be a major subdivision. Not every place is going to be a 3-bedroom. It's not always going to have 2 kids. So we wanted to go with something a little bit more modest so that the numbers don't just blow up and balloon out of control. For the students, we know there's a lot of different models for trying to estimate students and population. One of the simpler ones is you just take that 2.71 number, and then you say, well, the 7.1 is your kids, so that's your population. You just multiply all the housing units you estimate having by 0.71, and then you have all your kids. The problem is that doesn't actually capture who's actually in the school. So what we did, it just basically captures everybody from age 0 to age 19, so, or really 18. So what we did is we did the same thing. We took the number of enrolled students. We got that from the Wachusett Regional School District enrollment numbers, and then divided that again by the same housing unit and came up with a multiplier of 0.55 students per household. That's 0.55 students currently enrolled in the school district. And hopefully this will help explain what those numbers are. So what those multipliers mean, I mean, those are sort of, those can be very confusing. But what the multipliers are telling us is this is where we get the numbers for, if we know we've got, here we're estimating townwide, you've got 4,859 units, that's your capacity. Then we can say if we have a multiplier for people per household, we can look at those housing units and then we can estimate that you have the capacity for about 13,000 additional residents. based on the current zoning and current regulations. So really what I want to focus on here is first just obviously to explain what those multipliers are for, but mostly to show you some of the stuff that we looked at. When we take that, do all that GIS calculation, we came up with a number that shows us developable land that factors in the partial constraints, that factors out the absolute constraints, and this is just what's left over. We have almost 7,000 acres of developable land townwide. That gives us 277 million square feet. Possible new units of just under 5,000, new population, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just through the townwide. We also broke it down into two factors, which we're looking at inside that study area we just talked about, and then outside that study area. And you'll notice that we did look at water use and wastewater, but we only looked at it inside the study area, because we're assuming that that area is going to be where you're going to be drawing on your reservoir. It's going to be pumping stuff into your sewage system. That's going to be going on in that area. Everything outside of that isn't going to have as much of an impact. So it's inside the study area is the one that we want to look at for water sewer purposes. But for town-wide purposes, you're looking at potential 2,672 new students, maybe, at full capacity right now based on current zoning. So this is just focusing in on the inside the study area. So in here, we estimated that there were 1,668 acres of developable land, potentially about 1,400 units. Now, there's a little bit of give and take in there because some of these subdivisions that are showing up on that map, we did exclude because we knew there were fixed plans. Like, for instance, this subdivision up here, we knew that these parcels were more or less fixed. There's some, open space that's been taken out. Some of them down here, we know that there's been a few changes that have happened over the years, and so we weren't quite as certain how we should count that. So that one ended up being counted entirely as open space. But I think that there's a give and take, that it's a fairly solid estimate. Within that district alone, we would be looking at a new population of 3,817, new students about 774, and the wastewater and water use figures that you can see there. So I want to just talk right now about how this compares to what the town is currently experiencing. This is information that's based on the moratorium and my discussions with the State Department of Environmental Protection. Right now, the town of Rutland is very, very close to the permitted water draw and really kind of beyond tolerance limits for wastewater capacity based on the current contracts. The average daily water use as of 2017, as you can see, was about 357,000 gallons per day, and the wastewater was 490, roughly. The allowance is based on the permit that was given by the Department of Environmental Protection and the contract with the town for wastewater. The graphs that you're seeing there show the blue lines are essentially what has been used, and the red bar at the top shows what's essentially your headroom under current permits. So you're looking at a dramatically small bit of headroom there. And this is what was really driving a lot of the discussions in the steering committee. How do we manage this? How do we plan for this? What can be done to try to help with these impacts? And we're going to get to a little bit more on that. So if we were to actually build out to capacity within that study area, based on our current allotment, you would say over almost 300,000 gallons per day. You would need an additional 300,000 gallons per day in order to actually build out at capacity, which is far in excess of what you have the ability to get right now. Now again, that's if everything gets built out all at once, and we're not talking about looking at this over time, we're just looking at absolute capacity. So it certainly seems that given the rate of growth and given the history of development in town, that something would certainly need to be done to address this. So one of the things that we decided to look at, this wasn't in the original scope, and I just thought I'd bring this in to let you guys know. We got from the Department of Public Works a listing of the addresses that were connected to sewer and water right now. And we incorporated that into the model so that we'd be able to know. And one of the things we found is that there was a number of parcels that were not connected, but didn't really seem like there was a reason why they wouldn't be connected. So what we wanted to see is what would happen if all of those parcels that are currently not connected but totally could suddenly connected. And we found just by doing that, adding 0 new development, just all those people deciding to connect to the system, you would almost instantaneously be over. So there was, I forget the actual number. Unfortunately, I didn't write it down. However, what we did is we took all those parcels, we estimated how many units were on that, and we came up with a number of people that weren't connected, and that's what we would be looking at. Almost 50,000 gallons per day over the current limit just by adding the people that aren't connected right now. So the first thing now moving into options, the first thing that I think people would want to ask is, well, why can't we just increase the limits? And there's no specific reason why you couldn't increase the limits up to a point. The limits that on your reservoir, particularly for water draw, are set by the DEP. So there's a permit that the town applies for. It's a process you go through. And you can say, we need more than the 0.37 million gallons per day is how they estimate it. This can be done by the town staff. It's relatively easy and quick to do. We also talked about, can we look at the sewer contract? That's coming up for renewal very soon. Can we increase that number? We don't have good data on that yet, so we have to see what, hopefully we'll have some before the end of this project, but we think that's something that could be looked at. We also discussed, can we tap into other resources? There's, the aqueduct that's running through the town. There's been some options looked at to try to tap into that to increase the water supply. And I discussed several of those with the DEP, and really the downside is with all of these, there's limits. With increasing your permit, there's limits to how much you can raise that the DEP sets. And a lot of these options are big costs to the town, especially doing the water, tapping into the aqueduct is a huge cost. It's a very, very big investment. Obviously, if the town wants to do that, you'd have to decide that, but it is an option. It's just a very expensive option. As far as increasing the limit, I thought this was some very good information, interesting information that the DEP provided. Right now, your permit is at 0.37 million gallons per day. They told me that based on their information, Rutland has a firm limit set, which basically means you can't go really anywhere near this limit. The firm limit is essentially a number that they come up with that says if you have a major drought, will you run out of water? So they estimate it right now to be about 0.55 million gallons per day. So if the town did decide that what they wanted to do is try to increase that draw limit with the DEP, you would have to know that that is the ceiling that you're looking at. And you have a little bit of headroom. Really, it's, you're at almost 75% of the capacity given there. You could probably increase it a little bit. But you don't have a lot of flexibility in that. You can ask the DEP to reassess that 0.55 firm limit, but it's an expensive process again. It's something that the town would have to spend, that you'd have to get consultants to go out and look and see if really, I don't really know what you have to look at. That's beyond my skill set, unfortunately. But I was told by the DEP that the consultants could be hired that could look at this, but it's a pricey process. If you don't ask them to increase that 0.55 number, they told me flat out they will not consider raising you to that 0.55%. They would never do it. It's just they were not comfortable with anybody operating at 100% of their draw limit, because if there is a major drought, you'll just run out of water, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I just want to give that as a little bit of detail as to how that permitting process goes. So there's some other options that we've looked at. One of them is one that had a lot of discussion with the steering committee. This is the growth management bylaw option. What this is this is a provision that goes into the zoning bylaw, and it essentially says you have a rational-based limit on the number of building permits that can go out in a given year. It changes on it depending on from town to town. Like one option is, say, you look at the average permits over the past 2 years. So, for instance, in Rutland, right now, well, say if you had implemented it in 2018, then the last 2 years, that would be a 52 permit cap. So after 52 permits, you don't issue any more permits for the year. If you based it on the last 5 years, that'd be 41. But you have to come up with some sort of rational basis. You can't just pick an arbitrary number. You can't just say 2, and then you can get away with it. It has to have a rational basis, and it has to go into the bylaw. So the good things about this is that it's something that can buy the town time to be able to say, well, someone got their 52 permits. We know that they're coming for another 52 next year. Let's figure out how we can plan for it. It's something that slows the process down. It can help out there. And it's something that doesn't necessarily prevent people from building, and that's something you always want to try to help, is because you want to control the impacts of development, but there's limits to how much you can tell somebody what they can do with their land once they bought it. So, you definitely don't want something that's going to bring, a lot of potential for litigation to the town. On the downside, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't stop development. It doesn't stop growth. All it does is slow it down and spread it out over time. So, anything, your population growth, the impacts on the water, all of that, it's not really stopping it. It's just, dragging it out over a longer period. And it does have some potential for legal challenges. It is something that if you hit that cap and somebody doesn't like it, they can take it to court. This bylaw has stood up to legal challenge for as much as I've been able to research it. My understanding is that it hasn't been taken all the way through. It stood up at land use court, stood up under appeals. I don't know if it's taken, how high it's been taken. So there is still room to challenge it if you get a really determined person who wants to fight it in court. And there's always the risk, this last point about cutting out smaller property owners. One of the things that popped into my head is what ends up happening if you have a big developer who says, well, I got my subdivision, it's ready to go, I got my 52 permits, I pull all my permits, that's it for the year, and then someone comes in with an A&R, some small thing, some small subdivision they want to do on their property, and, well, you can do the subdivision, but you can't pull a permit till next year. There's the possibility that it could inconvenience people who are, not big developers. So, is that something that the town wants to do? It's something we'd have to consider. There are some other options. One of the options we looked at was establishing a water and sewer service district. Essentially what this is, and I'm still trying to get clarification on how this exactly works. So if you have specific questions, I might not be able to answer. It's my disclaimer right up front. My understanding, though, is that this is something where the town can essentially draw a line around a group of properties and say, here's where the water and sewer goes. Anything outside this district, you're not getting water or sewer. You can apply for it. Maybe there's a special permit process that's involved, but generally speaking, you can connect if you're in here. You can't connect if you're out there. Benefits of this, obviously, is this is the best way to set firm limits on the number of people who are going to connect. Because as long as you're inside the district, you can get all the water and sewer you want. Outside that district, you have to fight for it. And it doesn't stop development. It does have provisions for getting special permits under certain circumstances. Downside is it doesn't really do anything for any of the other impacts. It doesn't really help with students, doesn't help with roads, doesn't really do anything for traffic, et cetera, because you can still build subdivisions, they just won't have water and sewer. So this is something that would probably have to be done in conjunction with another solution. And then lastly, I just want to talk about a few other options that we looked at. There's a few other zoning things you could do. There's something called transfer of development rights. And essentially what this is the planning board would look at an area of town where they say, we've got a lot of farmland here, we've got a lot of land we'd like to preserve, we don't want it to go into subdivision. So you say that this is a sending zone is what they call them. And then you say, well, we'll put the receiving zone where the water and sewer already is. So basically what it does is it gives extra development rights to the area where you want development while taking them away from the place that you don't want development. Now, obviously for that to work, you have to have the buy-in of all the people involved. You can't just take development rights from somebody's farm if they don't want you to take it. So, it's a challenging thing to implement. A few towns in Massachusetts have successfully done it, but it's not widely implemented for that reason because it's politically challenging to pull off. Slightly less challenging, you could look at the option of downzoning and upzoning. Essentially what that is you look at the areas in town that you are comfortable with subdivisions going in, and you say, we will allow more density in that part of town. Places where you don't want it, you say we'll allow less density. You just basically change the zoning rules to say you need larger lots outside this district. I would recommend that if you're going to do any downzoning, if you're going to say your minimum lot sizes are increasing, it's really annoying that the terms we use for bigger lots is down and smaller is up. But anyways, it's really talking about density. That's why. I would say if you were going to do any downzoning, you would want to have some complementary upzoning to encourage people to still develop in the parts of town that you want them to develop. And there's some strategies for preserving more open space. You could use existing town funds. You could look at Community Preservation Act. I mean, one simple way to control development is to just take more land off the market. If you can find ways to buy open land and preserve it, then that's something that you can do. Now, again, this is challenging. You need town money. You need to be able to get the funds to do it in the first place. There are some state programs that help it, but not a lot. Community Preservation Act is probably one of the best ones for it. But it's also, again, challenging because it's essentially a surcharge on everybody's property taxes. And trying to convince people that a surcharge isn't a tax is often a very difficult thing to do. So I know that was a lot of information. What I'd really like to do is get some people's feedback on what we talked about. Given that it was sort of a data dump, I'd kind of like to begin with just asking, are there any general questions? Is there anything you would need me to clarify? Yeah, start with that. And then if we could get into some specific information, some of the specific options, what I'd like to be able to do is to take down people's comments about it. If there's any specific options you'd like us to look at, if there's any areas of concern you'd like us to really focus on, I'd love to hear about it.
I'm going to pass the sheet around for signing.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
You talked about 400 that have already been approved,
Yes.
but 4,000 that you're guessing actually could be built in town.
Exactly, yes.
And that includes the 400, or that's an additional to the 400?
That includes, yes, that does include those 400. So it's not on top of those 400. A lot of those get rolled in. Some of the parcels that have already been built since we started that phase 1 study have been removed from the calculation. And one of the things we tried to do to try to make that number more realistic is we also looked at a parcel by parcel basis, and we tried to look at any piece of land that had a house on it, and it had land that was too small to be split into more than one more parcel, and we took that out. So that's I think that's a pretty reasonable estimate. So because it's about as close as we could do without going to a parcel by parcel basis.
Follow up to that same
Sure.
question. land, and I don't understand all this very well, but I keep hearing people are going to take something out of 61A.
Mhm.
Does that include any of that possibility, which there's a lot of that?
It does. Generally, with a build-out, we will take into account anything that has a conservation restriction. APR will look at too. Anything that's got a real strong permanent development restriction on it, we will assume is not developable. 61A, Chapter 61, we consider that as developable land because it's just too easy to take it out. So that is factored in there. So, you know, that is going to slow down the amount of development if you've got 61A on that. And if anybody doesn't know, that's the chapter that gives you an agricultural tax break for keeping your land agricultural. So it's a state program. But you can get out of it very, very easily just by paying your back taxes for, 10 years, I think. And then, you know, it's not your full back taxes. It's just the difference between what you paid and what you would have paid over the last 10 years. So for a lot of people, it's not a big hurdle to get over, especially when you're looking at a multi-million-dollar subdivision or something like that, you know. So, yes?
When it comes to underground pipes, you're either going to have, with fresh water, you might have seepage. So are those values in terms of the cap, how much wiggle room there's left, does that take into account the current state, or what would be the best scenario if any kind of underground piping and seepage were to be rectified?
The number that we based all of this off of was the average daily draw, and some of that is taken into account because you're basically looking at the number of gallons that are being pulled from the reservoir. So that's going to include whatever seepage, whatever gets lost, and we kind of divide that up among the houses. As far as what would happen if you improved the quality of the pipes, that wasn't something we really looked at. I know that, or at least I believe the Weston and Sampson, there's that study that we're looking at. Are they going to be looking at anything like that? I know we've got that sewer study that's coming, and they're going to be taking a look at the pipe capacity, but I don't actually know if they're going to be looking at how much loss is coming from the actual underground pipes. Is that something that they'll look at?
I don't know. Sheila, do you have any input on that? Well, that'll be coming back up in June when we...
Yeah, we've certainly gotten a lot of data recently that Joe Buckley could comment best on regarding our current sewer situation and how weather and climate has affected it most recently in the past quarter or two.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of some of the discussion when it comes to expansion of the district, we haven't really seen that data yet.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be sewer that would be more of a concern, or the actual draw of fresh water?
Well, I mean, they're both a concern. I mean, the one that you're butting up against the limit the soonest is the wastewater. So the sewer is the one where you're really about to run out of capacity. You essentially have run out of capacity. If I understand it, there's been a number of years where the town has gone over its limits, and this is just the average that we're looking at. So there's really no headroom at that point. The water draw, I believe the DEP said there was a couple of years where you went over your draw capacity, but this was in average. This is looking at the last, I believe it was 5 years that they were looking at. So, so the headroom is can be misleading because it's really given year to year. There's a lot of variation in it. And, you know, it would definitely the town would definitely need to look at either increasing those limits or doing something to try to rein. I think you really have no choice but to look at at increasing some of the limits wherever possible. But as we looked at, there's limits to how much you can increase the limits. So, you know, you also have to look at other angles for it. Yes?
At those highest numbers for growth,
Mm-hmm.
where do we fall on that 0.55 line of how, you know, our 100% max will never touch that line?
Oh, yeah, if you actually got full development, you're way over it. You'd be way over that 0.55. So even within the study area, you're looking, let me actually go back to the number. Yeah, you know what, I can look at it later. But you're definitely over what you would be able to draw based on your current estimates. Again, though, this is capacity. This isn't saying it's going to happen right away. Things can change. You can always put, maybe in the next 5 years, next 10 years, you might be able to take a look at it and, look at how, if that firm limit can be increased. That is something the town can try to do, because it's based on rainfall patterns and springs, and there's a lot of factors that go into it that change from year to year. And the DEP will look at that. But again, it's an expensive process that you'd have to go through. So it may be something the town would want to invest in to make sure that that number is the most accurate, and make sure that you're at least, if you're going to draw a water and sewer district, that you can know that if you're built to full capacity within that district, you have the potential to get enough water without it impacting the actual water source. Yes?
If you look at the 0.55, say you take it down to 0.5, and then you take the overall developable land in the existing water and sewer district, and you divide that by what the limit would have to be, and then you increase the lot size and the frontage to equate to that, so that there's no way with the amount of houses that are built you could ever hit 0.5. Does that make sense? Did I say that right?
We're almost at it now, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean,
I think if you, I'm sorry, we are there now?
We're almost close.
Well, you said with the 4,000, right? Say 4,000 houses or units are built, then we're way over, right? So do we know what number would max out at? And we can't get to the 0.55. We know that. They won't even, they won't let you get there. So say it's 0.5 or say it's 0.45.
Yeah.
Then you figure out how much land is left, and then you do the math and you say, well, then every house moving forward is going to be 3.5 acres or 4.5 acres, and we know we'll never get there. It increases the value of the houses. The houses will probably be bigger houses, maybe. It increases the taxes on the houses, and now all of a sudden we're bringing, we've maxed out on our $300,000 houses. Now we'll get the $500,000 houses coming in.
Yeah.
And we know we're never going to hit that limit.
Yeah, I mean, that's an option that the town could certainly look at, to look at saying, can you upzone can you upzone it so that, or sorry, downzone. I'm getting confused. Anyways, can you change the zoning limit so that you increase the lot sizes to the point where you can't fit enough houses in there to go beyond that, 0.55 million gallons per day limit is essentially what you're saying, yes?
Yeah, I think,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can do that, absolutely. That's something that is possible to do. The challenge with that is that inside that district, you already have a lot of people who have houses that have plots of land, that have subdivisions that are approved that are going to be outside that limit. It would be politically challenging to do something like that. You're
400.
What's that?
The 400 you talked about.
Yeah, so.
Approved.
Yes, exactly. So there's some of those. Well, not all the 400 are actually inside that district. A lot of them are, but some of them are outside of it. So, yeah, but there's a lot of them that are within that district. But you also have to think, some people may not like the idea. They've currently got a lot that's big enough that they could split it into 2 lots based on the current zoning, and they were planning all these years to give one of them to their in-law. They're planning to give
30 years ago it changed too, so
yeah.
At some point you need to make.
But it is an option. I'm just saying what the political challenges are of an approach like that. Yes?
Ron, jumping off a little bit what Kevin was saying, did CMRPC in this process take a look at the sewer use agreement with Worcester at all? Was that part of any of the discussion?
We haven't looked at the specific language of the sewer use agreement.
So
we looked at we based it off of the cap number, like the limit number, but that's as far as we looked into it.
So I have a question, but I wanted to back into it from that.
Yeah.
So the .55 was a long, arduous legal battle to get to. There's one little chart within the sewer use agreement that allowed us to incrementally get to that 2020 number, that .55, and it was considered a build out at the time. And of course, as the years went by and we were talking about it, it felt like you were never going to get to 2020, and now we're at the door. In restarting negotiations for the new sewer use agreement, we're going to be looking for something similar, where you have your start number, if that's .55, and in X number of years, 20, 40, 50, we're going to get to a new number, maybe. Obviously, Worcester's going to have a lot to say about that, and this is certainly gonna be Joe, Joe's gonna be heading all this up. My question to you is this: you brought up a number for a managed growth bylaw and said it's gonna require some logic.
Yeah.
And gave us some parameters. So if we were to pull in what we know about our existing sewer use agreement and how that existing chart allowed us to move up over the years, is that a viable parameter?
I certainly think it would be. I mean, I think that seems like a perfectly viable parameter. I don't know the chart you're speaking of, so I can't, speak to it exactly. So just so I'm clear, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to write some of these down because part of what I'd like to do is be able to take some notes back with me. So what you're basically saying is use the permit number, that the average growth number that we would base the permit on, and use that as the basis for trying to negotiate or predict growth?
I mean, I guess base it on 10 years worth of knowledge that in the absence of a very aggressive I&I program, we were butting up against our limitations with Worcester Sewer. We know that the Worcester Sewer system has its own physical limits regardless of what happens up here, and it's going to be a factor. And that when we start to go in for negotiations for the next X years, I'm guessing it might be something like 30 or 40. Joe would know better.
10. Probably 10.
10? I see Joe says 10.
Yeah.
It's very clear that we will have the same discussion about whether or not we can do incremental increases each year and what those will look like.
We don't necessarily negotiate directly with the city of Worcester. We negotiate with DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, who sets up the agreement between the towns and the Upper Blackstone. So DCR will really be the folks heading up the negotiations.
Yes.
Ron, I had a question that has to do with your assumptions.
Yeah.
Being on the planning board, I've seen a lot with the private sewer systems and the E111 pumps outside of your study area. How and what thought process did the growth management put into that, adding on to the existing sewer system? Because that seems to be the new trend, is the private sewer system with E111 pumps.
So when you say the private sewer system, are they
Not
tying into the main wastewater? Is it
Yes,
is it
they're
going
tying
to
into
Worcester?
the main line.
Yeah.
But the sewer system within the subdivision, within A&Rs even, is private. It's not managed by the town or DPW there's no DPW tie-in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wondered, and some of that's happened outside of your study already. Your study
Yeah, I
zone.
mean, we tried to take into account as much as really Norm could tell me, and other members of the planning board could tell me, as far as where the action is happening or is likely to happen with sewer. So it's not going to account for everything. We wanted to make it a contiguous piece of land, because one of the things we were hoping to get out of this is that if the town did decide to try to do a sewer district, we wanted to kind of have the basis of a line. Obviously, that study area is not the sewer district. That's just our study area. But we wanted to say, all right, well, if you wanted to go that way, this could be a starting point for that discussion. So really, it's not taken into account if it's outside that district. So there's going to be some variation in there. Yes, Norm?
I'd just like to mention that the line that we drew, the amoeba that we drew around the town, pretty much takes, encloses almost all of the
private that we've got now?
Yeah, or our proposed.
All right.
Yeah.
Just as an example, on this, private versus public sewer, we have a proposal in front of us right now for 34 senior housing units. They are all going to be connecting into what will be the town sewer system by way of their own private sewer system.
Yeah. So just to kind of go over how this ends up. So this bluish area, that's the amoeba that Norm was just talking about, where we were sort of like, we think this is going to get an extension. We know this one's going to get an extension. The red lines, if you can see it, this is the data of people that are hooked up and reported as utility customers. And these yellow ones are ones that showed up as utility customers but weren't included in the original line that we drew. So they were shaded like that just to kind of explain the difference between all of those. So, there's some things that were captured in this blue area that weren't actually connected to the sewer, and there's places that are captured in there that aren't ever going to be connected to sewer. So, I think it's going to balance off a little bit. It's not perfect, obviously. There's really no way within a year-long study that you can capture every single nuance, but we try to at least try to account for as much of it as possible. Yes?
Apart from water, is this group going to be addressing all of the other things? Quality of life in town, taxes, schools, why 52 a year when other towns are doing 2? Will this be addressing other quality of life besides just our water restrictions?
Well, and that's a good question, and that's a large chunk of what we wanted this informational meeting to be about. Because we did sort of come in looking at this water and sewer because it was the most pressing issue, but we also know there's a lot of things that everybody else is, other people in town are very concerned with. So I'd like to open that up. Like, what other concerns are people having that you'd like us to look at? I mean, obviously, students and taxes were named, but yes?
Town services, the Wachusett budget is astronomically taking our total amount of money of our town budget. So if the town's going to grow and the town services stay, if I'm not mistaken, the last 3 years it's sort of been level funding, that's going to be a problem.
So in addition to these, are there any other things that you think that we ought to be focusing on? Yes?
I just want to add, I think it says student, does it?
Student impacts, yeah. Sorry, my handwriting is terrible. I try not to write on these things, but we ran out of Post-it notes. So,
I think having build-out numbers that reflect your percentages of students per household is going to be huge. We're seeing what's going on in Bolton. Suddenly they're saying they need a new school within the next 3 to 5 years. It's a huge impact, so.
Yeah.
Well, you'd be going from 1,600 to 2,700, or 2,700 additional students if it was full capacity, based on your analysis, right?
Yeah, and again, this is not looking at it on a linear scale. This is looking at it just at the end point. With the Holden analysis, I worked on that one as well, and what we did is we did a linear projection of what they would be getting, what they could be seeing year on year based on their current development patterns. We could do something similar like that. It wouldn't be terribly difficult to replicate their model to give you a sense of, like, based if you're seeing 52 units a year, 47 units a year, whatever it is that you're seeing. It's a little bit harder to do in Rutland because you've had so much variation. You were going anywhere from 1% growth a year to like 5% growth. It was really kind of all over the map depending on how the market was doing. It was a little steadier in Holden, so it was a little bit easier to justify doing a straight linear projection, but we could definitely do something to give you at least a sense of what it would look like on a year-to-year basis.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think if you could help us, Ron, a little bit on articulating the number that we had. So the last time that this article went forward, the number was 56 permits with, I think, 5 additional in there, and it didn't fly. 56 dwelling units plus an additional 5 permits and an exemption for senior housing. So that was the wording of the last attempt. If you could maybe help articulate, again, on the same type of idea, same type of warrant article to be pushed forward, but why the lower number would work. And second part is, about a year ago when we kind of kicked off the steering group, your presentation to the board indicated preliminary numbers were like a 95% out of 100 return based on each additional house that comes in there, specifically because of the students per household rate in there. Did you do any updates since then, or maybe can we get like a refresh of what the rate of return is for a new dwelling coming in now to the tax situation? Is it still less than an even trade?
I haven't done that estimate with this. think I should be able to. I don't see why I couldn't do the model the way it was. I'm not 100% sure. I guess, yeah, no, I think we could do it with just with the inside the district versus outside the district. We could do an estimate on that.
One thing I would just say, just to carry over on some stuff that other people have said, in terms of the school budget, just to give you guys an idea of where we are currently, the selectmen and the finance committee are meeting tomorrow with the representatives of Wachusett School District. Their initial budget proposal has us at a $500,000 increase this year just on Wachusett's end, and our number of students going to Bay Path increased. So that's another $100,000 increase there based on the number of students increasing there. So just on the education side of things, we are looking at a $600,000 increase over last year. So it is something that we're looking at. As was said earlier, Marlboro, Agawam, some other communities have put in a moratorium on the number of building permits that have gone out, and I spoke to Mayor Vigilant from Marlboro about that. The issue with doing the moratorium style thing is while they capped it at 15 building permits a year, the Attorney General's office only allows you to do that for a 2-year period at a time. So it's really slow. It's that temporary piece like Ron was talking about earlier, but at an even more temporary rate, if that makes sense. So that's why having the logic behind it allows you to have that slowing down of the process, if that makes sense to use the word twice. And the zoning laws are always changing. I was just at an event at the State House today where Governor Baker announced that the administration's filed a new bill that reduces the zoning laws for certain types of zoning changes from a supermajority down to a simple majority for 7 or 8 different reasons. One of them is changing zoning to allow for new residential units. So should that pass by the end of the year, that could have an impact here on that as well. And part of that legislation also reduces the number of requirements for certain special permits to be taken out by the planning board, particularly for new housing units as well too. So depending on how that bill goes by the end of this legislative session, it didn't go anywhere last time, could have an impact on this as well.
Yes?
If the 95%, I mean, that's the crux of the whole matter.
Mm-hmm.
You get a new house where it's costing us.
That's right.
Our taxes have gone insane in the last year or so. So do we have the ability, besides what was just being said, to say, okay, we're not going to do 52 or 56, we're going to do 3. How low can we maybe go to say this is going to be an ongoing, I mean, we already have 400 that are approved already. Well, not building permits, but how can we stop bleeding money from the town, from our pocketbooks, and take away the quality of life by adding more traffic and needing more services? I mean, this is obviously what you guys hopefully will continue to work on, but simple question, can we do that? Can we change the amount of building permits so we're not bleeding money?
Hope so. I mean, that's certainly a viable option is to, as Ron said, we need to articulate why. You can't just say, I mean, with you, Carol, I like the single digit permit idea, but if we need to justify it, we need to do that.
I know
before didn't work, so.
The minimum is we can't say we're not giving any out. The court said that that's unconstitutional. But when we find an amount after that, like Ron said, it just we have to have a reason behind it.
I mean, what you have to think about when you're planning these things is you have to look at what the state has already said you just can't do. It's outside your powers to do. And then once you've gotten past that point, then you have to look, how is this going to stand up if somebody decides to fight it? So the more of a rational basis you have underpinning any bylaw change that you make, the stronger it's going to be if somebody decides to fight it. It's inevitable. There's nothing you can do. There's no bylaw you can put in place that's going to not be challenged by somebody at some point. I mean, unless you're really lucky. But it's always going to be subject to challenge. So there's no foolproof way of doing it. the careful way of doing it is just to try to make sure that whatever your basis is, it's as rational as possible so that if anybody fights it, you can say, well, no, look, this has been the pattern. This is why we did this. We haven't really gotten that close. 52 was kind of a good number just because we had I think there was 50 the year before, 55 the year above that. And then, I think I don't know what they did for 2018 because I don't think the numbers came out yet because we're getting these numbers from HUD. But, you guys might be able to tell us how many building permits got pulled this year. But, you could put a cap to slow it down a little bit. You could make it a 5-year average and say that would be about what I think we said it was about 47 units per year. But again, you can use whatever basis you want. You just have to make sure that it's something that is going to stand up in court. It should definitely have precedent. If there are towns, we can take a look at other towns and see what they've said. Yes?
The premise you're taking is it's gonna pass town vote, so.
That's the other challenge.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah.
I like the thought process,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, but and this is my opinion from being here almost 20 years, you're 0 for 4 with growth management votes in this town, so. I'm just saying, you gotta make it really.
I heard a rumor from one of my colleagues that's working with another committee that the last vote only missed by a handful, or she said even one, but that seemed.
No. I got it here if anybody wants it.
It was 7 votes?
And it was 14 years ago?
Yeah, it was a lot. It was.
I could tell you. So it was May 18th, 2002 was the vote. And it went to paper ballot. It was 240 yes and 178 no. So the motion failed. The vote needed to pass by 2/3. So, it passed but didn't have the 2/3 in there. And that article, like I said, was a cap at 56 dwelling units, 5 permits. One thing that I thought was different in here in the research is that the Finance Committee did not recommend favorably on the article because they wanted more figures as to how it would affect the town financially. The town is depending upon new growth to help fund budgetary increases. So the mindset at the time, the discussion at the time in 2002 was that the growth was needed to help with the raising taxes in there. So Ron, and just for the public, this is not the end all. This is not the conclusion of the steering committee. This is kind of midway in there. So Ron, if we could add that to maybe our tasks a little bit, so that we can have all this stuff up front before we go to town meeting, which is when it needs to be acted on, is the financial effects. And we also haven't talked about traffic effects, parking effects, things like that. So perhaps maybe we can circle back a little bit, expand it.
Well, and we do have good traffic count data at CMRPC. And we might be able to take a look at, some snapshot periods and see what the traffic count was when you were at X number of housing units versus where you are now. And, we could definitely take a look at that as well.
So these are the minutes if anybody wanted.
But Jeff, even when you just said about parking, I know that there was a discussion at a meeting recently about wanting to expand the parking lot here behind the library down below.
Yeah.
And every time we do that, that's a ton of money. So it's not just how many people are flowing through town, it's how many people park at the library and all the additional things.
Then you get into the Little League and the soccer,
absolutely.
recreational fields, and the senior center, and
The schools themselves are basically full.
Can someone remind me, when was the last time the town did a master plan? Do you have one in operation right now?
I don't.
06.
06?
06 or 08?
06, I think.
Because the reason I'm asking is that's a question that, when you start getting into a lot of these questions, you start thinking about, all right, well, if we're going to have all these people, how are we going to, what's that's going to do to the roads? Maybe we need to improve the roads. We need to do this. But, you also have to remember, if what you're also worried about is your town character as it is right now, you have to question whether or not you want to improve the capacity of the roads. Because again, as you improve the capacity of the roads, you're making it easier for people to move in, more people will want to move in, and then you're changing the character of the town. So it's like having a master plan is one of these processes where you can try to come up with a snapshot of what you want to do, what you would like the town to look like, and then have that filter down to all of these aspects. Obviously, we can take a look at all of those potential mitigators, but not having a full vision for it. So maybe one of the things that can come out of this, we could just recommend that maybe you guys should look at doing another master plan, because you definitely not having that full community sponsored vision of what you'd like the town to look like, might make it more difficult for you to be able to make good decisions on some of these things going forward. So,
What a coincidence, we just hired a new town planner.
Sorry, I know you've been wanting to ask a question for a while.
Yeah, no, I just had a couple points as far as you look at the, the setting a parameter on housing units per year, and you talk about the, over the last 5 years, over the last 3 years, over the last, in my opinion, all those years has been too much growth. So to set parameters on that, and this is just me, justifiable parameters would be more in that 3 or 5 or 10 range for a couple of years, see what happens, because if we add 52 new houses and you get $4,500 per house, we're still, the town doesn't benefit to make up the $600,000 that we're going to get next year, and the other $600,000 we're going to get the year after that. So even if you add 52 houses, is that a fair statement that we're not gaining any momentum financially?
Right.
We're losing. We're losing.
We're losing.
We're losing. We're going backwards every time we do it. So it only makes sense to have that as a big focus, to realize that every 52 houses we put in, or every 40 houses, or every 30, or even 10, we're losing money. So then you look at doing the parking lots and all these other things, you want to spend all this money and do it, basic question, where's that money going to come from? It's not going to come from residential. It's not.
It's not, Kevin, it's not necessarily the houses, it's the students per household.
Students per house is right.
So
Well, and that's
senior housing will be a benefit to the town.
And then the other kind of rolled into it, and I don't know, and I've been in a couple of the meetings and heard some stuff. We've got some solar stuff going on. Money from solar, is that going into general fund? If we said, hey, look, and I know with the parameters on that, there's some really good numbers there, right?
Yeah.
So are those numbers do we know what that's gonna use, and can parameters be put in place now, knowing that when this money's coming up, it's not just, and I don't want to say frivolously used, it's used generally for, if we're adding something to this town and we're making money from it, then it should be used to develop that town, in a certain way. And then another point I wanted to bring up was, is there anything currently now for a larger fairway or road coming in through? There were plans in the past years for 190 extensions and other things like that. Has there been any talk at all? Do we have, I'm not saying worry about it, is that something we should be concerned about? In 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, are they going to all of a sudden try to connect something right through here, and also we've got a highway that's coming through here that we didn't want, or can we put something in place to make sure it does or doesn't happen?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything.
For me, that's a good thing. I didn't know if that was in the
I'm not in the transportation
cards.
department, so I miss a lot of that. We have a whole group of people that deals with that. But I can ask around and see if there was anything. The last thing I'd heard about was the connection. I know they're looking to redevelop that connection through Holden to, where was it? It's the highway. It's the highway connection that's going into Holden. I forget which road it is. This is how not in the transportation department I am. Sorry about that. So, yeah, Tim?
Ron, have you, the other question, which was a good point that just brought up, when you were looking at the build-out, we've had a lot of solar fields that are taking up residential property that were at one time. Was that factored into your build-out, that, there's 10, 15 acres, 20 acres being knocked out in lump sums for solar fields? We've got 8, if not, I don't know, 10 solar fields, and they're averaging 4 to 6 megawatts, which is anywhere from 15 to 20 acres.
So we had a lot of internal discussion about that. We did go through, and Dick Williams was nice enough to mark every solar field he could remember on the map for us, which was actually very helpful. And we looked at that, and we tried to consider what impact that should have. We didn't factor that into the account ultimately, because it's got similar circumstances to chapter land, in that it's not a permanent development. It's not something that is meant to be for the life, be there forever. It's something that's intended at least to be removed, and you're supposed to be able to revert it back to whatever its original use was. Whether or not that happens still remains to be seen because it's a new program. So we did actually count that in. So, you can take that, as you're assessing the validity of the numbers, whether it's too high or too low, you can take that into account. There is a lot of solar land that we did look at and decide that we were going to treat it like regular developable land because it's too easy to remove. So,
one thing I'd just like to say, just before it gets too far from what Jeff said, yes, the senior housing is the better of the options because we don't have that school impact on the side of it. But just for the people at home who are watching, and in case anyone doesn't know this yet, and having been here a month, I will say I don't know the zoning code off the back of my hand yet, is that not all senior housing is the same. So if it's considered a small enough house to be considered a trailer, the state actually, where every other house's taxes and payments to the town are based on the value of the house. If it falls under the certain parameters that it could be considered a trailer, then it's a flat rate of, it's under $100 a year per unit. So if a new senior housing development comes in that says it's a trailer size house, then it's really not as much of an impact as it is there. So we don't have any of those that are coming in yet. And I will make that clear, the ones that are coming in as a full senior housing unit. But should that come down the line, that is something to keep in mind too.
I have the zoning bylaw right here.
Special permit for senior housing, so.
Okay, well, there you go. There you go. Just something, that was an issue in another place that I've worked, so just as a thing to keep in the back of the head now.
And I think there's something else to point out here. That's a very good point. When we were looking at these numbers, we made no distinction between regular single-family housing, senior housing, or multifamily housing. We made the assumption that everything that would be going in here was new single-family houses. That was the assumption that we did for all of that. So when you start looking at, okay, maybe there could be some multifamily in there. Maybe there'll be some senior multifamily. Maybe there'll be two-family. You get some smaller units. You have smaller families. Won't have necessarily the same impact. So, I mean, there is a lot of variation in here that goes into these numbers. These are just sort of the starting point that we're going to use to guide the discussion as we're going to figure out how the town is going to mitigate the very present impacts on the water and the finances and the things that we've already looked at as part of this phase. Yes?
This is probably for the steering committee. We're approaching March. Is there anything that's going to be put before the town in May, knowing that how long it takes to write a bylaw and put it together?
That was my objective. We just opened up the warrant last night. We wanted to get the information out there so that we could absorb it, hear from you, take it back to our boards. We also meet every 2 weeks with the steering committee, so we do have a little bit more homework to do in there. But, speaking solely for myself, yeah, I hope so. That's why we've been pulling what was done in the past. But we haven't had the data yet to even have that discussion amongst our individual boards. We all represent the different boards that have some sort of a plan.
I asked is I know with legal, that takes some time. And
Yeah.
it's about 2 months.
Yeah.
Well,
Curious.
I hope I'm not, speaking too soon, because obviously the steering committee hasn't made any decisions. We've had a little bit of discussion. But sort of the low-hanging fruit that we've been looking at is the growth management bylaw. That's something that's already been tried. The language is essentially there. Really, the question is going to be how to parse it and how to make it something that could be more palatable to the town, since it obviously failed the last however many times. You said, was it like 5 times it hasn't? 7 times? I don't know how many times we tried to do it.
But I think, Ron, things have changed. We have results since then, 18 years of results based on the development. And then also they had different concerns at the time. So it's not identical. It's not...
oh, no, yeah. I was just trying to say that we've got a
identical.
basis to work from, so we're not trying to write something completely from
Yeah.
scratch. And then the other piece was talking about this the sewer district, which is not something that necessarily has to go to town meeting. My understanding, based on the guidance I've gotten, is that the sewer service district is something that can be established by the town without it going to town meeting. It's not a bylaw written, it's basically just you draw it on the zoning map, and this is, you put it in your regulations. I have to find, I'm looking right now for some examples of how that has worked in other communities. This is based off some smart growth toolkit guidance that we've had before, that I've gotten from the internet, and I want to make sure that that we've got an implementation strategy, so I'm doing some research on that. But if that pans out, that's something that can be an actionable policy change that wouldn't necessarily have to go to town meeting. So, do you have another question?
Yeah, I was just curious, you talk about the zone, if you had a sewer, an in and an out, and then you've got, on the outside, say you're gonna have somebody, like, somebody's gonna come back and say, my family's had this lot, we had always planned on this, it's got 200 feet, it's 1.5 acres, now all of a sudden you've made these changes, they're grandfathered in, can they get a deduction on their, so instead of a stipend or something on the, not a stipend, but, instead of something added to the tax bill, they get something reduced because they're outside and they have a septic system that probably costs $20,000, $30,000 to install and to maintain and to pump and all that. So they're still paying money as not directly into this town water, but then maybe they're not paying as many taxes. They're outside of that zone.
I mean, not to my knowledge, is there any kind of tax break for something like that at the town level?
No, there currently isn't. I'm just curious if that's something that as you talk to other towns, has that ever been looked at to say, because then if people complain, you can say, well, this is deeded into this lot. Whoever the lot is sold to is going to get a break on their taxes down the road because they have to have a well which is maintained over years and replaced at some point. They have to have a septic system.
Well, I mean, okay, so there's two separate points to that. The first one is the sewer, and the second one is the grandfathering piece of it. Now, I don't know, I haven't actually come across any towns that have done that, have given people tax discounts for not being tied into the town sewage and water system. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I just haven't heard of it in Massachusetts. The other piece being grandfathered, really the way grandfathering works, so if you change the zoning on your house, on your lot, and you previously had enough land to subdivide it, and now you don't, all the grandfathering does is give you the right to continue to have your house. If you tried to subdivide it, then you would have to you'd have to base it on the new rules.
What if there was no house?
If there was no house.
What if you have a lot that's 200 feet, 1.5 acres, and that's approved now, and then something changes and it goes to 250 feet, 3.5 acres?
Would make no difference.
What's that?
Would make no difference.
These are new.
Yeah.
You'd still be able to build a house there. If it's one of those 400, right?
Yeah, I think we're talking about new ones, right?
We're talking about, no, so say there's there's 400 now. You say there's 400, and say out of those 400, 200 of them are, not even close to even
so if you were approved before the zoning change, then you could still do what you were approved to do.
But then afterwards, then you have a 10-acre lot. Well, you know what? You might have been able to get 5 house lots previously, but now unfortunately you can only get 3.
Yeah, so if you wanted to change it, if you wanted to subdivide it, you'd have to do it under the new rules. Right. So, yeah, you don't get any benefit from it, and you can't say that because you could have subdivided it before, and then we changed it, you can subdivide it now.
On the 400, right.
So, but you could still do what you were approved to do, provided you got the approval to do it before we changed the zoning. So that's what that is. So,
right. Thank you.
All right. All right, I don't want to take up too much more of everyone's time. Did anyone else have any additional questions? Any pressing concerns that you have for us? Any worries? Any fears? Any directions for the committee? All right, well, thank you very much for coming out. I appreciate it. I'm really glad that this was such a good turnout. I was a little bit worried given the fact that I was getting alerts about the weather every 10 minutes on my phone, but...
So, on behalf of the board, very good turnout. Thank you for coming out. I want to thank the Cable Committee for accommodating us for our meeting here. And for the steering committee, can we throw out our next meeting date so we can plan accordingly?
Yeah.
2 weeks from now would be March 13th, a Wednesday.
My calendar.
And lastly, is your PowerPoint going to be loaded on your website, or would we have that available for our site with the data?
I can, yes. I can upload that to our online folder, and I can share it. If we want to put it on the website, I can share that with you.
Yeah, we can put that on the town's website for sure. That way it's available there for you guys to see. On my end, I just want to thank the steering committee for the work that they're doing too, because it's really helping the town out. And just to throw it out there too, I have written to Secretary Kennelly from Housing and Economic Development and Secretary Beaton from Energy and Environmental Affairs, letting them know some of the issues that we've talked about today and invited them out to the town. And I talked to Secretary Kennelly today. We'll see, he's only been in for 30 days too, but he is going to try to come out here and take a tour and see what we've got going on here. So hopefully that'll help too.
It's still a work in progress. If people didn't feel comfortable coming out tonight or speaking, we do have our contact information. We do have a new town administrator here who's most open for comments, questions, and facilitating, so myself included.
And our meetings are open to the public, so anytime we do have one, we actually ask people to attend them.
So
yeah, they're posted. So if you see it and you're interested and you want to come and see what we're doing, feel free to come. We'd love the input.
Yep. We have them right here. Is March 13th okay for people?
Not me.
You want to keep it on a Wednesday?
It works. Tuesday, Wednesdays, or Thursdays are always pretty good for me. So
The 14th works for me.
I can do the 14th if everybody else can.
Okay, yes, sir. Thursday, March 14th. Mike, can you see if we can get this room again, or a room?
I can get you a room. I think finance is in that meeting for a budget, in this room for a budget meeting.
Thursday the 14th will be our next follow-up.
But we can see when it is there.
That room works too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just before 8 o'clock, anything else? Any alibis? All right, call to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second? Second. Okay, thank you, everybody. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Again, if anyone wants my card.